I guess where I'd like to start, Alexandre, is around the question of uh, the origins of your practice. And by that I mean that when I see a person, an artist's practice, my first thought really is, where did this work come from? You know, what led the artist to this work that I'm seeing in front of me? And I think to myself, there must have been a point in the deep past, because so much work actually comes out of where we started.
Well, it depends how far back we go. I mean, I can go back to my childhood and say that I always liked spaces.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as a child, I would build spaces with chairs and bits of cloths and whatever I could find, blankets, and I'd build sort of mini architectural spaces, and I would sort of sit in them and not really do anything, but, just like be there and just feel the comfort of a little sort of private zone. And actually, that was something I would do like regularly, like most kids. But I really, really enjoyed it. So maybe I would do it like most kids, but maybe a little bit more. And at the same time, I would draw a lot. Like I draw all the time, and I draw these stories with like figures and stuff, little men and a whole bunch of stuff happening. Like I invent these stories, again, like most kids. But my desire to do art emerged at first from my drawing practice. I would draw, and then I'd like to draw, and then as I grew older and I was an adolescent, I would sort of do even more drawings, and I figured by then that I wanted to be an artist. And I didn't think about all that thing about spaces anymore, because to me being an artist was like drawing, and then maybe painting, and that emerged from my drawing. And then I was convinced that I wanted to be an artist, but I didn't need to actually study art, because I had this romantic idea that you're an artist or you're not. And so in high school, I took an art class just as a sort of an offshoot, something you could take when you're in science or something. And at that point, I sort of noticed that just the discussion about art and all this, and even skills, like technical skills and stuff, there was a lot of stuff to learn. And so I figured, no, I want to go to art school. That's what I want to do, because I can't just be an artist without being involved with the actual community of being in an art environment and stuff and learning stuff. And again, all that emerged from the drawing and the painting and stuff, and not from the building spaces. So I was in art school, and I was in the Concordia in Montreal, and I was studying painting and drawing mostly, but I was enjoying sculpture more. And suddenly, as I was working, all these things about building spaces started coming back. And I wanted to make sculpture that has a sense of being the same space we're in, and we need to walk around it, or it occupies space in the same space that our body occupies, and it sort of took over. And at that point, I knew I wanted to do sculpture, but not really architectural spaces, just sculpture that involves your body and moving around and stuff like that. And that's what I did for a couple of years, and then I did my master's. I went to London I studied the Slade. I did my postgraduate at the Slade School of Fine Art, and my sculptures became even more about like walking along them and having a sort of experience that involves almost like walking along walls and stuff, like in art, and turning corners and stuff like that. Very ordinary experiences that we have in our everyday lives. And then when I came back to Canada, I started doing shows and producing art. I had a studio and stuff like that. But it wasn't specifically these architectural spaces. And I was invited at one point to do a show by Marie Fraser, who's a curator, and she invited me to be in a show called La Demeure in 2002. And that show was all about the experience of La Demeure means the house, or the home, actually. So it was all about this domestic spaces and public environments and stuff like that. It was like all about different artists were building pavilions or stuff like that. And that's what I did. I decided to do an exterior pavilion near just in front of the MAC, where there's the Place des Spectacles now in Montreal. That space doesn't exist anymore because they're building this huge architecture there, this big building. But I built this sort of pavilion that was made to be used by anybody at any time, and I had no idea how it would be used. But I just had this idea of a plan, how it, like a space with a sort of an agora, like a center space. And there were some trees that would go above it, so I used the trees to make different heights, so people could be protected by the trees, but they would climb on another section, they would be like, their heads would be in the trees and branches and stuff. And then I would go back just to look at how it's being used, and I saw all these different people like use it in different ways, drinking their coffee, or like coffee breaks, or they're eating their lunch, or some people would sleep in it at night, and sometimes there was like this place where there's this bar now, this club actually, very close by, and all the clubbers would come out at 3 a.m. and they would just hang out there till 6, 7 a.m. And it was like an agora where they had like 50 people who would just sit there and sort of chill after their night out clubbing. And I started going back just to check that out. And I'd go in the day and I'd go in the night, go in the evening, different times of day. And at that moment, when I did that piece, all this thing of like building spaces sort of connected to that. Like, directly, I could actually consciously think about all those spaces I'd built. And I felt from then on that I wanted to do work that can be used, and can be used in many different ways by different people. Okay, so that's the moment. If I go back, there's like that connection between my childhood, like most artists. There's always stuff from who we are and what we like, and that moment where I was invited for this show, and all this sort of came back and it connected. So that's the sort of origin of my my practice now. What happened after that is that I went on building other spaces or architectures, or like pavilions, or you could call them what you like, for different shows and for different contexts, sometimes inside, sometimes outside, and they were always made for like an informal use, something that's undetermined. So I would never know if it was made to be, how people would use it. I didn't know if people would use it for just hanging around or skateboard in it or whatever. And a whole bunch of stuff happened, obviously mainly for the stuff that's outside, because you don't control what happens. Like some of the stuff was destroyed or burnt down, vandalized, one was burnt down. Some of the stuff was disappeared. Like I did some stuff that was mobile at one point, and my work disappeared for 3 weeks and then came back, and some people could see it, follow it on internet. They would see it, I don't know, on some blogs or I don't know where, but and again, it was always a very informal use of what I would do. And at one point, that's like another moment, like, if we're going back, in 2009, I was invited by Ace Art Inc. to do a show in Winnipeg. And at that point, something happened, is that they asked me, can we organize different events around your work that you will build in the space? I said, sure, why not? So they organized stuff on a daily basis, like different activities that were planned out. And from 2002 to 2009, I had this idea that it was better if nothing was organized, if people just used the work in a very informal way, or whichever way they wanted to. Like we use exterior architecture, like if you sit next to a fountain or a public place, no one really determines how it's being used. But at that point, they planned all these different activities out, and like stuff like rollerblading, concerts, film projections, reading of political manifestos, performances by other artists, poetry readings and stuff like that. All night shows. So I just said that for films. I don't know, bicycle races. There was like a hill going down, so they had like kids rolling down, competitions of like kids rolling down and stuff like that. And all these different activities that were organized by the gallery. At that point, when I looked at all that, I sort of I enjoyed just seeing the diversity of the activities, and the fact that they were all organized didn't bother me. And before, it sort of bothered me because I had this romantic idea that if something was organized, it was compromised in some sort of way because it's like an institution organizing something. But then I figured, no, I quite like that. That's how society is organized. There's some moments where things are actually organized collectively, and other moments where individuals decide by themselves how they use space. And there's like a rhythm in our lives between everything that's organized individually and the other things that are organized collectively. And so that's like another moment where at that point I decided that my work could be, the use of my work could be planned out by different institutions or by myself. So the idea of directing the spectator or the user in some sort of way became less problematic for me. So that's another moment. There was like my childhood, this first work I did, and then this moment where planned out activities were taking place, and I sort of saw that positively. And since then, that was like 7 years ago, since then, I've been sort of pursuing a practice that involves informal use and more organized use. Sometimes organized by myself, where I can actually plan out like the way people will use the space, and other moments where it's not planned out at all. And here I am sort of doing that, and I plan on continuing to do that. That's sort of the origin.
Interesting. As you were talking, I was thinking, whether it's a mythology, whether it's in fact a practice for many artists, the general concept of the artist is that they're doing something for themselves, that they are expressing something that's inside themselves, and they need to describe it or explain it or demonstrate it for others. But I'm hearing in this trajectory of yours, Alexandre, that in fact you've come to the point where it's not the self but the other that you're interested in extracting, in having expressed. Would you therefore be suggesting that what an artist does isn't necessarily to express something inside them, but to elicit something from outside them?
Well, there are different ways of looking at this. First of all, we are our first spectator. I think that as an artist, when we look at our own work, whether it's work that has been produced and shown, it's out there, or whether it's stuff that's being produced, and you're actually working through a process, you're always thinking of yourself as another. You are the other looking at your work. So I always feel that there's something that is built in art, and it's the fact that it's always made for someone else. And that someone else can be very specific in certain cases, but often, and most often, it's a very general thing. It's just the idea that it's being offered to someone else. So that's how I see art for myself. I know there are many different ways of thinking about art and what it can mean, but for me, the other is built into the work. And to me, a work of art is something that's being presented to another. And as you're working through that process, the other is yourself. And then it's literally other people. So I see art as something where it's a sort of a meeting of, something is pushed out there for the other, and the others, when they are literally there, looking at your work or appreciating it, are seeing something that's presented to them, and they can decide to accept that and to a certain extent abandon themselves to the work, or not. They can decide, no, I'm not interested in that at all. but there is that possibility of a convergence, you know, like something in French we say une rencontre. I don't really know what the word would be in English. Anyway, and so to answer your question about the, you know, the expression of oneself, I don't see my art as an expression of my inner thoughts, but you know, like I told you earlier about my childhood experiences, it emerges from there, it comes from there. So you can't really, I think there's no way of avoiding that. It's a natural phenomenon, but our personal experience are also things that we know other people can have, and it's not something selfish. It's something where we feel that it relates to others. It's like empathy when we see others suffering or being happy, whatever. We relate it to ourselves, but it goes both ways, you know. And so when I relate my work to what I've done when I was a kid, it's also relating it to what others have done when they were kids, and it's just like something really natural. You see kids and you see adults just sitting next to a tree or in a corner somewhere, just feeling comfortable or feeling not necessarily comfortable, because there are different types of experiences. Maybe we'll talk about that a bit later, but you see that and you realize it's like a universal thing, and obviously there are cultural differences and all over the world that will create different experiences for different people. But there are certain things about our relationship to space that relate to our life experience, and it's not just a spatial experience, it's how we relate to the moments and the people we were with and our anxieties and our whatever, you know. So it's always loaded with a whole bunch of information, these experiences. And so when I do work that relates to space and is offered to other people, it's also, I also think of how these people will take on that work based on their life experience. Okay, and at that point, what happens is that I try to consider the fact that there are experiences that are really, really personal, that they're different to all these different peoples, and there are also shared experiences, and in those shared experiences, there are conventions and a whole bunch of things that sort of bind us together. And I work with that. Okay, so when I do work that's not an expression of my sort of inner thoughts or my emotions or whatever, and it's more something that's offered to the other out there, I'm also offering the work. Well, I don't like the word offering, but I'm making work that takes on the fact that myself and others and all these other people, everyone is connected through our familiarity with different like stuff like the height of a bench, or just walking along walls, or climbing upstairs, or feeling the height of a ceiling above our heads, or all these experiences. They're familiar experiences, but they're also there's a whole bunch of implications. You know, they're not neutral experiences. They're political implications. They're the way we are raised. There's like conditioning. Sometimes there's some stuff that we learn in a very violent way, where we learn to sit in a certain way at school and this, you know, sit down for hours in the same chair. These things are not necessarily good things, but once we've absorbed them and once we've assimilated them, they're part of who we are. So all the good stuff and all the bad stuff, it's all part of who we are. So I try to work with that. So what I'm getting at here is that all this thing about the relationship between myself as an artist and my emotions and what I think and all that, and the others, all this sort of merges together when you start thinking about how our use of space, architecture, and our understanding of art and all that is worked into like conventions and ideas that are complete transformation, and everyone participates in the transformation of these ideas and conventions and norms. It's like language, you know, everyone learns language, but everyone participates in the transformation of language every time they speak, and depending on what words they use and the frequency of use of the words and all the meaning they give to words and stuff in conversations, they transform language. So all these things are sort of merge together. So I don't really, I can't, at one point, at a certain point, you can't sort of differentiate what relates to personal expression and what relates to something being sort of presented to people that are exterior to oneself. You know? I don't know if that sort of answers the question, but it's
very well.
Yeah.
But it leads me to something else, which and you're bringing up language. I think is quite fascinating, because it's also been alleged that your practice essentially is around the deconstructing of the agency of space itself. Now, when we use the word, the word deconstruction is used, of course, we know that it's about challenging the failures that occur in language or in any production in order to elicit greater consciousness of that which we're experiencing. And you remarked a little bit earlier about unpleasant spaces, about spaces that are an infliction of some kind. Do you want to follow that thought of deconstruction along?
Well, that brings us to like critical thinking in a way, you know, because we are, and I have my relationship to critical thinking as it's been sort of as it's defined in the world of art it's problematic for me. I mean, I have this, I don't feel comfortable with how we see critical thinking, and that will bring us to like being conscious of the space and deconstructing the space and all that. I mean, obviously, critical thinking is important, I find, you know, and we have to try, and everyone tries to be more aware of things around them and stuff. And like myself in my art, when I do work, I try and think of all the implications and all the way we're brought up to understand and use environments, built environments, and space and objects in space. But I like to have people. Well, I like to have people. I would. My idea of art is that, or my idea of my own practice, what I aim to do is, you're gonna have to edit this at one point here, is that I think it's important for people not just to be in a mode of critical thinking, because when you're like in totally critical all the time, there is a point where you sort of pull back, and you are not actually involved in a way that is where things just happen in a fluid, where we're in not an unconscious way, but in a way where you're very ordinary, where you're not actually thinking about what's happening all the time. So I want my art to be about a critical approach to the use of our built environment, but not only that, I also want it to be about an ordinary use. And I think that it's interesting to be able to think of art and experience art in a way that is not necessarily focused as like a very specific experience where like you're completely aware of what's happening. There's like a heightened sense of being there, of presence in a relationship to the work that's in front of you or that you're using, and also you're like at a maximum of critical thought, like really you're really there. I that's good sometimes, but it's also interesting to be able to think about art as something that's happening in a very casual way, something where you're not, you know, it's almost like if you're distracted. So I like this idea of being distracted, being not thinking of art as a special experience, but thinking of art as also as an ordinary experience, and maybe working with these two things, like have them balanced out, like the idea of like being very conscious of what's happening, and also just being almost unaware of what's happening and just doing it, just living, you know, in a way. And to come back to critical thought, I find that in the world of art, we've sort of put critical thought on a pedestal in such a way that it has become formatted and almost like a new academic way of thinking. You know, we have this idea of critical thought, and we've become complacent. So, I'm aware, I'm thinking of all the possibilities of, and I understand all the historic background of that and everything that's involved in the conditioning that I've received, and I'm trying to move away from all those things that inhabit me but are problematic. That's fine, but if we become complacent about it, it becomes it's counterproductive, and I sort of worry about that because I feel that in contemporary art in the past maybe 50 years, there's like an uncritical approach to critical thinking, you know?
It's lovely.
Yeah.
I want to spring from that to this thought that I was going to approach later on, but I think this is the ideal moment. And that's the question of what is authentic, or what do we mean when we say something is authentic? And it occurred to me as you were talking, Alexandre, that as I searched my mind for an answer to that, and I don't mean to presume the answer you want to give me, but the thought occurs to me suddenly that the cognizant flaneur might be something of what we're talking about here, as perhaps the most authentic experience. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, well, I like this idea of flaneur, someone that actually is just going with the flow, but at the same time conscious of what's happening, which is an idea that's been developed like late 18th century in Germany and with around the Athenaeum and all these romantic thinkers, and then 19th century in France, and then with 20th century was again with people like Benjamin that comes back and stuff like that. I like this idea, but there's an aspect that I don't like about that idea is the sort of the dandy-esque aspect of someone just being so much someone that's not caught up in life, that can afford to actually just go with the flow, you know, and just because they're rich or because they've, you know, they're like, there's no problem in life. It's like you're like in a privileged position, and that historically that figure has been defined from a privileged position, and I like the fact that people have all these problems and they're involved in all these things, and they're taking they're taking public transportation to go to work, and they're tired, and they're gonna arrive late, and all these things that are part of our experience of space. And then there are people who are like, you're jammed into a metro with or the subway with all these people around you, and then other points you can just relax in the park. There are all these different experiences that are not distanced or removed from your everyday life. I sort of prefer that, and I want my art to be part of everyday life and everyday activities, and not to be something like an exception in our lives. And I feel that the flaneur, anyway, the way I understand it, is a bit too much of something that's removed from everyday life. But I like the way it combines being involved in something and being a bit in the margins of society, but to a certain extent.
So if we come back to this question of what is authentic, whether we use the word or not, it's really rather that question of our experience of the street, of our daily experience of moving from one position to another within the turmoil of the cityscape.
Yeah, well, authenticity is a very complex thing. Well, it's a very problematic idea, because we never know if we're authentic. You know, I remember just I don't know, it was just like this anecdote here where I remember seeing this TV thing where they had it was forgot the name. It was this. It's like reality TV, and they had like men and women. There are a whole bunch of there's like a group of people at the beginning of the show, and then one person is removed every week, and that was like years ago. I saw like this first show where the first man that was removed by a vote from all the women, when he was removed, he was just led to a car, and they said like goodbye, but they had a camera in the car, and he was leaving, and the camera would, you could see like on TV the camera, and the guy said, I was removed because I'm too authentic. And he said that about like 60 times. Oh, because I'm really authentic, because my emotions are out there, and I would say what I think, and I'm really authentic, and that's why I was removed first. So, and I was thinking, my God, he's on camera, he's like on TV, and he knows that what he's saying, he's actually not saying to his friend next door that came to pick him up. They asked one of his friends to pick him up, but he's saying that to like millions of people, and he's still convinced that he's authentic, and there's nothing less fake than this thing there. And I think about that every time I think about the word authentic. This moment, because it's weird. How do you know what is authenticity? It's like something we aspire to, obviously, because we want our lives to be meaningful. But I can't use that as a concept to work with, because it's sort of it freaks me out. Like if I start thinking about it, I start wondering, why am I thinking about this word? What can I do with this word? It becomes problematic. But then again, obviously, when we do art and we present art to others, whatever it is, we want it to be authentic, at least in the sense that we don't want to be just doing stuff for self-promotion, or we don't want to do work just for our career, or we don't want it to be instrumentalized for something else, unless we understand instrumentalization as something positive, like, for example, for political purpose. You can say, I want this work to be used to pass on a political message. Well, that's different. But we don't want to be instrumentalized in the sense of for ourselves, for our own achievement of whatever.
Alex, I want to follow along that thought that we were discussing around what constitutes how we want to reach the audience, how we want to reach out to the other, I guess you could say. Now, you've talked about how you imagine the public interacting with the work, so I don't think we need to go to that. But I'm kind of interested in a larger subject which often comes up, which is the sense that there's a zeitgeist, or there's a dominant discourse by which artists are attempting to reach out to the other, attempting to establish some ground of commonality. So I guess my question is, do you believe in a zeitgeist, or do you think there is such a dominant discourse? And especially today, what's happening today?
Well, in terms of dominant discourse, I tend to think that there isn't. Obviously, there are discourses that are built by media that seem like dominant discourses, but I like this idea that there are all these different things happening, and if at the same time, and they all connect in different ways and on different levels. For example, if we're here like in an environment, like we're all artists here, and we're thinking about how our work relates to people in terms of art, there's that aspect. And in terms of the art discourse, I think there are many conflicting ideas about what art is, and I'm fine with that. That's good. There are a lot of people that will think that there's only one sort of general platform that integrates all these discourses in a sort of fluid way, and although we don't agree on what art is, the fact that there is a discussion creates this sort of very vaporous and fluid and sort of environment that connects us all, and therefore we won't agree, but we are all sort of taking part in a general sort of field that involves all these different competing discourses, and there are tensions and there are antagonisms and stuff like that, and it's a bit like the political sphere in a way. And I don't mind that idea. I actually quite like that idea, but I prefer to see it as something that connects to other spheres or other fields. And I find that art is more interesting when there's that crossover. So when I reach out to audiences, for example, I'm not only thinking of an artistic sort of audience, and although my work evolves and is presented in the context of artistic interventions, whether they're in museums or galleries or outside in the street, it's also presented to people that are not directly involved with art, and even those that are involved more sort of in a more serious way with art, like art historians, artists, critics, whatever, all these people that are conscious of what's happening in the contemporary art world, these people have other aspects of their lives that are happening at the same time. And I I think that my work, like anyone's work, doesn't exist outside of that field of art. In the sense, it's not just there, and all the discourses and discussion make the work visible. They actually, I agree with people like Hansien, for example, that will say that it makes the work. It doesn't only make the work visible. It makes it happen. I mean, there is no work, there is no art, if there's no discussion on art. It doesn't exist as art on itself. You know, it's nothing if it's not interpreted and thought out as something else. But what I don't agree with is to put that field of art, or that discussion about art, put it on like a center stage where it's the only thing happening. And I think that all the other things that are happening are just as important. And I see the field of art and the discussion on art as one background or one way of framing the work that relates to all these other backgrounds. I like I'm repeating myself here, but anyway, what I want to say is that for me it's particularly important because I do work that people use, and people who use it are not necessarily in the context of art. It can be outside, they're just walking along, they're sitting down, they can do other stuff, they can read a book, they can have their coffee, they can open their laptop and just sit in my work and do something. When they're doing that, whether these people are familiar with the art world or not, they're not completely thinking of the work in terms of an art experience. They're doing other stuff, as I was saying earlier, stuff that relates to like just not thinking about art, not being in a conscious art experience all the time. And therefore it's important to have all these connections for me that, you know, that sort of move away from the field of art. So the audience, when I'm trying to reach an audience, I'm trying to reach an audience that is where every individual is actually experiencing things on different levels at the same time. And to me, what I call art is like a knot. It's this thing where all these different fields meet, and that knot is you cannot fix it. You cannot sort of stabilize it. It's like a convergence of all these different things that crystallizes at a point that is always in flux. And it's important for me that flux takes on, you know, stuff that is not art related. So to answer your question about, or not your question, but continue the discussion on the idea of how we reach out to a community and how this community exists in the zeitgeist, I think there are maybe like a constellation of zeitgeists, and there's they meet at points that are always different, that are always fluctuating and changing. It sounds a bit sort of corny when I put it that way, but I guess that's what I think, really. But,
well, it's interesting, as you were talking, I was thinking, what the concept of the Gordian knot comes to me because of your reference to the knot. And I'm thinking, so here's another interesting question about art history. I remember just recently Philip Monk, when questioned about writing art history, simply said, I wrote the book, come and I'll sign the book for you. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, the art historian cuts the Gordian knot and says, this is what it's about. Mm-hmm. Do you believe in that then? I would say you don't.
No, I don't. I mean, to me, there's someone else said there's history, but there's no art history. I don't know who that was. Mm-hmm. I read that recently. Anyway, well, I think that we are actually, history is, we cannot look at work or any type of activity, anything outside of a context, and that context involves history. And obviously there are art history discourses that have influenced how we think and how we see art. No one has a pure unconditioned, can you say that, unconditioned? In French we say inconditionné. Mm-hmm. That sort of unconditioned approach to art. No one, you know, we all have our ways of seeing art that comes from our education and all that. They come from our education, and from what we thought and everything that we keep on thinking, and that's normal and that's unavoidable. So yes, art history will frame work in a way that creates the work in a certain sense. But as I was saying earlier, to me, it's just one thing among others. And it's a bit like, I think that we try, in a way, like a lot of people that will talk about the context of art as something extremely important. You know, we cannot look at any art outside of context. It's true, I agree with that, but some people that put the emphasis on that to like such an extent that they want to undermine the sort of sensual experience of art, or in a way, not that they want to undermine, but that undermines the sensual experience of art. I worry about that in the same way that I worry about people at the other end of the spectrum that will say, oh, art is some sort of pure experience that is beyond language, for example. You know, it's impossible for me. It's impossible to be beyond language, even if language is a way. It doesn't. It's not. It's sometimes complicated, and it's there's like all these gray zones. It's still always there, and we cannot have an experience where actually we turn language off, because that's how we think. That's how we're constituted. That's how we've evolved as social individuals. And what I like about language, and I'll see the connection here. What I like about language is that it connects our inner selves, you know, how we just, our consciousness with a community, you know, because language is how we think, but it's also exterior to ourselves. Like we have intentions, we have a way of seeing the world, but also language is determined socially, and we learn language, so it's something that connects our inner self to our outer self, and I think art does the same thing, you know, and also through language it does that, because there's all these norms and there are all these things that we have learned that are part of us, and I think art history is one of these things. Okay, art history, and it's not just art history for specialists, because everybody has an experience of art history, because everybody learns about what art is, what it can be, what it should be, what it was, and it's not an elitist thing. I think it's built into our culture, and it's built into language, and it's built into ourselves, and we connect to a community through that, you know, through that connect. I mean, we connect to a community through language and through all that we've learned about language, and yeah, so our history is just part of that. It's not, it cannot be the dominant thing, you know. Nothing is a dominant thing for me. I don't know if I'm saying this right, but I think you sort of follow what I'm saying.
I like it.
I might have expressed that in a sort of
no. But it leads me. It leads me to the question of theory, because if art history is something that we all share, and I think you've spoken to that beautifully, art theory for many people is not something that we all share, and yet you just referred to Rancière a few minutes ago, and clearly theory plays a role. What kind of role does it play for you?
Well, as an artist, I try to develop a practice that is we used the word authentic before, a practice that is authentic in the sense that it connects to how I see it. So theory, the first aspect of theory for me is to have ideas, thoughts about what I do that are that have a sort of real connection to what's actually out there. You know, if I'm presenting something like an built environment that's built out of plywood, that's ephemeral, that's placed in the city, and I describe that work as an expression of my grief because my grandmother died, it doesn't make sense, you know. So that's like ridiculous. That's pushing it a bit further, but it's too far. But you know what I mean. It's like an example, just to say that theory is a way of understanding our work. So we have that in ourselves, as like I teach, you know, and when you teach, that's what you sort of expect from students. You don't really know what you know. You're not expecting them to think this or that, but you're expecting them to build a discourse and develop ideas that relate to their work in an authentic way. Mm-hmm. So I see theory as something to start off personal, you know. But as I was saying earlier, there's nothing really that's personal, because like language, I mean, we are social beings, so our inner selves connect to our social environment and the way we live and we are determined by an environment. And theory is part of that social environment. Now, as you were saying, it's not something that involves most people. You know, when we think of art theory, we think of something very specialized. But again, that is okay, because if you see it as something specialized that involves certain people more than others, that's okay for me. If you acknowledge that other people also have specialized fields of interest, and everybody does. So it's, you know, it's not like people that are involved in theory have a perfect access to art and others don't. Is they have a certain point of entry to what is seen, what's out there, and others have other points of entry. I find that when we want to get rid of theory, or we want to sort of see it something snobbish or something pretentious, what we're actually doing is we have contempt towards people who are not involved in theory, because what we're saying is that we need to remove something that is above them to have a universal access. But if we actually respect everybody, we're saying that everybody has a different access, and theory is part of that access, and some people have a direct access to that, and other people will have an indirect access because everything connects. So theories that are discussed in a specialized environment end up affecting culture, and end up affecting language, and end up affecting everybody. Like all the other aspects that are involved in the lives of other people will affect the people who are actually developing theory, you know. So to me, theory is not a problem at all. It's something that is important. It's a way also of being critical, but in a positive sense, of not in a complacent sense, you know. And it's also something that works in an antagonistic sort of field of where nobody agrees, and I find that's really sort of a healthy thing, you know. Yeah.
Which brings me to the fact, as you mentioned just a few minutes ago, Alexandre, you teach.
Yeah.
And it's often thought by many people that somehow teaching is, at one and the same time, elitist, and also at the other end, removed from the practice of art. And yet, as I hear you talk, I hear, you know, the immense excitement of bringing the real world, you might say, into the studio, into the teaching studio, and addressing ideas that are maybe informal and maybe formal, but attach the student artist to the real world. Mm-hmm. Would you describe it that way?
Yeah, well, yeah, I agree with that. I think that teaching is an activity where you are actually with other artists. It's a community that permits and that makes it possible for people to have discussions. First and foremost, it's different to like other fields where, I mean, I think an art environment is more of an environment of discussion than an environment of actually learning specific things. We don't really know what we're teaching, you know. Mm-hmm. But I don't see it as something elitist at all. And maybe I'm going to say something here that's not, I don't know to what extent it's actually true, but I noticed that in Canada, people who are in art schools come from all walks of life, all different environments. Anyway, where I teach, I have some people that have, you know, like their parents were artists, they grew up in an artistic environment, and others that they grew up on farms, and they know a whole bunch of stuff that's different. So, and so I see all these different people have different experiences, and these experiences are shared, and we sort of, that's where we start from, and then the idea is so that's an example of how, I mean, life is ordinary life and everyday life is already there in the art school. Mm-hmm. And I noticed that in certain other places I've been to, like in the US, I felt that art students tend to be more privileged. Mm. So it's in a way it's more uniform in art schools. Anyway, there's a few that I've seen where everybody comes from a certain background that's similar, very well educated. They want to be artists from the start. They know they have more drive in a way. But I feel that it's more of an environment that's homogeneous in terms of how they have been prepared for art school. And so what I like about teaching is actually seeing all these different people that want to be artists, but for completely different reasons. And that puts me in a situation where I have to myself readjust constantly how I see teaching and how I see how the discussion can evolve. And I like that because it reminds me that art school teaching is not about giving a certain specific formation that will make people make them good professional artists. It's about receiving all these different approaches to art, and or the discussion about what art is already open. It's already on the table because all these people come with these different experiences, and you're sort of you have to deal with that and just make sure that people sort of go a bit further in their own thought process about what they're doing and what their practice can be. So it's not about formatting people. And so I enjoy that. But the problem, though, you're saying about it has to be sort of not just in a bubble. It has to be there in the world, and that world also involves the art world. And I think that it has become problematic because there's so much administration and stuff involved with teaching that there's a lot of people that become, after a while, they sort of remove themselves from actually doing art and showing art, and they're in an environment where that becomes like a bubble. And to me, it's important that art teachers are, they're artists. Although we could say that it's good. Some people do more art, and some people are more theoreticians, and that you get all these different teachers. But I still like the idea that the university, or whatever institution that is equivalent to university in art, is connected to not just to the university world, not just to the academic world, but to the art world in general, and the world in general, in fact, society and all that. So I'm ambivalent about teaching for that. Sometimes I really enjoy it when I speak to students and I see how much they enjoy, doing their own art. And sometimes I get a bit depressed when I just feel that I just want to be in the studio and I have to spend too much time teaching. That can be a bit. Well, I mean, I'm not everybody that has done some teaching knows that.
Well, okay, that leads to an interesting question, which is the question of career, of being a professional artist, and the exigencies around it, whether you teach or whether you work in a life insurance company or something like that. We all find, at least I'm speaking from a Canadian perspective, we all find that by and large you need a so-called day job.
Yeah.
So the question, of course, that comes to mind is how, for many people, when they look at artists and they admire artists or they find them weird, the question that is on their minds, and they often speak to it, is, well, how do you survive? I mean, how not only financially necessarily, although that too, but how do you survive the difficulties of actually practicing art in order to pursue a career, a professional career as an artist, alongside these other ways of surviving in the world?
What I do, as I was saying, I teach, but I see my professional art life or career as something that just happened without actually aiming for that. I mean, I just wanted to do art since I was young, and I just do what I have to do to make it possible. Okay, and if I have more money at certain moments, I can do projects that involve more money. If I can get a grant, I can do projects that are more ambitious, and just in terms of, not more ambitious in terms of the quality of art, but more ambitious just materially in terms of the scale and stuff like that. So it's just like one day at a time, really. I didn't actually plan an artistic career. All I've done is just like move from one day to another. I need to do this project. I have this urge to do this thing. Maybe I don't really know why, but I want to do this. What can I do to make it possible? And if I didn't have any resources, I would still do art, I'm sure, but it would be art that involves not having a studio, not using materials that cost money, not hiring people to help me. I think that the idea of limitations or constraints is there for everybody, and it's there as a positive thing it has always been like that. If you look at anything that's been done at any time in history, it's always partly a reaction to, I mean, we have ideas and stuff, but even the ideas are nourished by limitations that we already know or that we anticipate. So there are always constraints, whether there are material stuff about what can you, you know, if you only have certain tools and certain materials, you will work in a certain way. And even if you're a conceptual artist that does work that is completely immaterial, there are still constraints just in terms of I mean, memory and stuff. What can you do in terms of how can you think of work? What are the possibilities based on your own thoughts and the and sharing them? How can you share them? What type of platform? So there are always limitations, but still you can do work that costs nothing. And I just find that sometimes it's frustrating if for artists who would like to do stuff that involves certain. I'm going sort of off the subject here, but anyway, artists that involve that need money to do work and they don't have it. But I don't know. It's a difficult question because I've never actually thought of myself as someone pursuing a career. It's just I do one show at a time, and I'm always working on different projects at the same time. So I've got like a million projects that are planned out, like most artists, and some of them just materialize because of possibilities. Sometimes because I'm sort of more aggressive about making them happen by applying for having a show or this or that, approaching people, and other times because people approach me, and that's quite satisfying. Well, you actually don't have to approach people, and people approach you. It just feels better somehow. It's like less work, but yeah. So I don't know, artist career. Okay.
I feel that as we talk, Alexandre, that you have, you might say, a nuanced sense of humor, and artworks always have a mood that threads through the practice. And it could be a mood that is, as we were talking a bit earlier, perhaps a mood of critical inquiry, very much tuned to the social and the political, and in some respects you might say dead serious. Alternatively, a practice can evince a sense of the comedic, the sense of the nuanced sense of disappointed expectations maybe, or whatever it might be. I'm kind of curious whether within the frame of your practice, given that it is so much a matter of involving the other, whether this sense of humor that I get from talking to you, you see as the basic mood that might go through the practices.
Actually, I've not thought about that. In the sense, I don't think of my work as being humorous, but I can understand. I understand what you mean, and I'll have to think about that actually, because I don't really know how to answer that. I see my work as not being invested with a specific mood. And to me, that makes it possible to be appropriated by others. So I like the tone of my work to be somehow almost as if what I put in is toned down so that people can see it not as something neutral, but as something that is related to a general atmosphere of like norms and conventions. Like when they see my work, they see stuff that relates to a public space or the height of a step or a bench, things that are common to us all, and not things that relate to my attitude. Okay, that's how I tend to see it. So humor.
If I turn a corner,
Yeah.
I don't know what's around the corner.
Yeah.
And it can be a sense of anxiety, or it can be, the mood established can be a sense of curiosity and surprise. Do you have any thoughts about which of those experiences you build into the pieces that you construct?
Yeah, I do. Actually, I try to have something where it's for example, when you arrive in one of my pieces, sometimes you will go up and it's almost like you're going up towards something, but there is nothing really, okay? So maybe in that sense, there is a deception that's, you know, that's prepared. I mean, I work with deceptions and stuff like that, and you could see it as something humorous, but not like a let's laugh out loud humor. More as something that relates to, again, or the way we are deceived by normal experiences of just like turning a corner and maybe expecting something and it's just a corner and there's nothing else. So my work, yeah, the way you're describing humor now, I understand that. It's about where something will happen, but actually nothing is happening. But where it's not that humorous, is in the sense that the fact that something will happen, it's not happening, it means also you can make it happen. Whatever happens, the event is how it's being used. And it boils down to that. To me, art is the experience of art, and it's also an experience that involves not being an experience of art, because if it's just thought out as an experience of art, it's not the experience I'm looking for. I'm looking for an experience that is conscious, reflexive, critical, but also ordinary, and just like if you're distracted. I have to invent a new word for this. Something that's not quite distracted, but it means that you're experiencing something intensely without having the idea of intensity. There must be a word for that.